Evolution, Chapter 9, Threatened. After stopping Rojo's gang from robbing a train, Jen wasn't looking forward to the massive press and fans that waited when the train pulled up. She was able to avoid the mass of people thanks to Grandpa Max landing the Rust Bucket 3 behind the train. They boarded quickly and took off just as fast. Jen raced to the control console. "Thank you so much." She trailed off as she spotted Grandpa Max. His arm was in a sling, and Pierce was driving. "What happened?" Pierce looked up at them. There were dark circles under his eyes, a matching set under Grandpa Max's. Max sighed. "I wanted to keep this from you as long as possible, but now I have no choice." He sighed again, rubbing his injured shoulder. Gwen stepped forward, her hands glowing. Max sighed as she began to heal him. "Ever since your identity got out, your old enemies have been coming out of the woodwork. They've been targeting the people you care about, the ones who can't defend themselves." Jen felt her heart sink and her knees shook. Kevin guided her into a chair. "Mom and Dad, are they—" Max shook his head. "They're fine. Between Pierce and I, we managed to stop 9 attacks over the past week or so. But I realized last night they aren't disorganized like I had initially thought. It's actually well planned. I wanted to keep you out of it, but that's not really an option anymore." Jen glared. "You should have told me. I could have helped." "You have too much on your plate as is. But we believe we know who's behind the attacks." Max pushed a button on the console and pulled up a picture of a grayish clown with dirty red hair and a large blue nose. Jen growled under her breath. "Zombozo, that 2-bit clown! I will end him!" She leapt up from her seat and started pacing. Kevin frowned. He had never seen her this wound before. She kept pacing, fiddling with the Ultimatrix as she did. Gwen seemed to be thinking, "I don't remember him. He was at Mount Rushmore, but I don't remember the first time we fought." Jen nodded to her cousin. "You wouldn't. You were on a literal emotional high through that whole thing. Basic rundown, he's an emotional vampire." Kevin frowned. "So, like Morningstar?" Jen shook her head. "Not quite. Darkstar feeds on power. Literal power. Zombozo feeds on the chemical output in the brain, not the electrical. Happiness is best. I'm betting serotonin tastes great. He likes fear, too. But anger, that's something he can't stomach." Kevin nodded. "Then let's give him food poisoning." The rest of the team looked at him, Jen incredulously. Gwen seemed a little disgusted. Pierce shook his head, and Max raised an eyebrow. "Okay, so it wasn't my best material, but let's put down the clown." Jen nodded, but Max spoke up. "Sandra and Carl's safety has to come first." That was how they ended up splitting after confronting not just Zombozo, but Charmcaster and Volcanus, too, and stopping them from killing her father. They trailed Carl to the store and back in case the trio of villains decided to try again. They'd left Pierce guarding her mother. The next day found Gwen accompanying Sandra on her outings for groceries, though this would become quite a bit harder come Monday when two of the team had to go back to school. Though at the moment that was not Gwen's biggest problem. Zombozo had gotten the drop on her, and the 3 villains had made off with Jen's mom. They had left her behind, though. Zombozo and Volcanus preventing Charmcaster from killing her, so she could deliver the message. Jen was beyond angry, and for a moment, Gwen was certain she saw her cousin's eyes flash bright green just for a millisecond. "You lost her? You were supposed to protect her!" Kevin stepped between them. "It was 3 against 1. Gwen's lucky they didn't kill her." Jen deflated like a popped balloon. Gwen pulled her cousin in close. "I can't lose anyone else." Jen said it under her breath like she hadn't meant for anyone to hear her. "We'll get her back. I can call Pierce. He'll set the plumbers tracking her." We'll get her back. I can call Pierce. He'll set the plumbers tracking her. And Gwen can use her powers to track her. Gwen nodded, but Jen pulled back and shook her head. There is one good thing about Zombozo. He's predictable. There's an abandoned carnival outside of Bellwood. We'll start there. Kevin nodded, and Gwen was already on her way to the door. Jen took her car, Gwen hopping in with Kevin. Kevin frowned as Jen peeled out of the driveway and shot down the road at speeds. When he got what she was feeling, though, when he'd gotten her call that his mom was sitting in her living room looking scared, he had felt a moment of pure dread. He could only imagine what he'd feel if she'd actually been taken by one of his enemies, much less 3. It didn't take them long to arrive at the carnival. They knew they were in the right place when one of the games attacked them. Unfortunately, this place was huge. Jen was insistent they split up. She wanted her mom found as fast as possible. Gwen pulled 2 bracelets out of her bag and handed one to Kevin and one to Jen. In case you run into Charmcaster before I do. It won't protect you long, but it should protect you for a little bit. Kevin nodded and slipped it on. Jen had already taken off down her chosen path. The 2 of them frowned after her. I'm worried what's gonna happen if she gets to Zombozo first, Gwen said. She still looked guilty about losing Sandra Tennyson in the first place. Kevin nodded. Yeah, you and me both. Good luck. He pecked her on the cheek and took off down his path. Gwen nodded and raced down the center aisle of the games. Jen was almost disappointed she got Volcanus, but became more annoyed than anything when he summoned his minions. She went ultimate big chill and twirled once, fire spewing from insectoid lips, leaving everything it touched frozen solid, including Volcanus. She only left his head free, freezing his neck so he would be trapped inside his suit. He shuddered. Either you tell me where my mother is right now, or I lower your temperature until you get hypothermia. Do you know what hypothermia does to a body? I do. It's not pretty. Volcanus quailed under cold green eyes. Zombozo has her at the big top. Silver-haired chick is at the roller coasters. Not anymore, Kevin spoke, stepping into the hall. He was no longer wearing the bracelet Gwen had given him. She teleported out when I tricked her into setting one of the rides spinning into her. She's long gone. Big Chill's wings drooped. That means... Kevin realized what that meant as the Necrophrygian phased through the ceiling. He smashed his way out of the building and raced after the bright red form of Ultimate Big Chill towards the big top. They were not expecting to find Gwen and Sandra sitting outside, Gwen munching on cotton candy. Jen ran into her mother's arms, still a bright red moth. Sandra hugged her daughter as she transformed back to normal. You're okay. Where's Zombozo? Kevin was wondering the exact same thing. Gwen smirked. We won't have to worry about him for a while. We came to an understanding. Jen didn't question it, just happy her mother was unhurt. She drove her mother home, being sure to actually follow the rules of the road this time. Kevin and Gwen stayed at Jen's house that night. Kevin crashed on the couch, and Gwen in the spare room. Once Jen was asleep, and Kevin was snoring softly on the couch, Sandra slipped into her niece's current room. Gwen was sitting on the bed waiting for her. Do you want to talk about it, dear? Gwen shrugged and let out a long, slow breath. Not a whole lot to talk about. That wasn't strictly true. Sandra had gotten to see the full potential Gwen was capable of, a power that scared even her, but a threat that would warn off those wishing to harm her non-combatant family. Hopefully, it would be enough. Sandra smiled softly at her niece. We both know that's not true. But you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. I just wanted to say thank you. I feel a bit better about Jen being a superhero knowing you've got her back. You know, you and your ruffian boy. Gwen grinned. He's not so bad. He's a big softy under all the walls. Sandra smiled and pulled her niece into a hug. Be that as it may, I will be leaving the door open, and Carl and I are sleeping with ours open. We'll hear any funny business, so be warned. Gwen snorted loudly, and Kevin grunted on the couch in the next room, turning over and settling back down after a moment. Don't worry, Auntie Sandra. I don't plan on waking him up. Sandra nodded and hugged her niece again. I may not understand the world you and Jen live in, aliens and magic and all that, but I'm here for both of you if you need me. Gwen hugged her tighter and nodded. Thank you, Auntie Sandra. Sandra patted her comfortingly on the back and let her sleep. She didn't get much. She could still feel the full anodite crawling under her skin, wanting to be set loose. It had been so easy to do. Maybe if she could just get it under control. But she was worried what Kevin and Jen would think. They had been so defensive when Grandma Verdona tried to force this on her. Not that it hadn't been appreciated. But with that power at her fingertips, Gwen was worried she might lose something precious and not even know it was gone. She lay in bed for a long time, contemplating the nature of humanity and how easy it had been to threaten Zombozo with death and worse for what he'd tried to do to her auntie, to Jen's mother. She rolled over and squeezed her eyes shut, trying not to think about it. Chapter 10. Alternate. Getting tricked into helping Harangue get her moves for a literal killer robot, well, it was a low blow to say the least. Jen was not happy about it. Her secret identity had been all over the news for the past 2 months, and Harangue seemed determined to use her for his own benefit. So she took her Uncle Frank's advice and took a TV interview, her first, as damage control. So, of course, everything had to go wrong. The interview itself was going really well. Then the light started. It grew brighter until it was the only thing she could see. She felt as though she was racing along at light speed. Gwen stared at the TV in disbelief. 1 second, Jen had been smiling shyly at the interviewer, a pretty woman with black hair, who was on the Channel 7 news. The next, a bright light filled the room, and when it cleared, Jen was gone without a trace. Her phone rang. She picked up. You saw that, right? Kevin's voice came over the phone. Saw? Working on believing? She did that. Gwen was glad she had a DVR. She was going through the interview frame by frame. The very last shot they'd gotten of Jen had a look of shock on her face. Definitely not her. You try and find her your way, I'll work on it my way. You got it, babe. Gwen frowned at the phone. I don't really like babe. Sorry, I was trying something new. Won't happen again. Rex Salazar wasn't having the best of days. He had made a new superpowered friend, sure, but Six was still in a coma. Though Holiday thought his chances looked good. And he'd had to say goodbye to his new friend, possibly forever. He frowned as he watched the portal close behind the green-jacketed boy. He'd miss Ben. They had so much in common, but as he turned away from the portal, it grew bright again before dying completely. There was a thud, and he spun on his heel. Battle-hardened instincts had him ready to fight at the drop of a hat. But he frowned at the sight of a familiar head of brown hair and green jacket. Shit, Cesar, you said this would work. Ben, are you okay? The figure on the ground looked up, and Rex blinked. That wasn't Ben. They could have been twins, set side by side, but there were some distinct differences between the two. This one was at least 2 inches shorter for a start. But the most obvious difference was that this one was curvy in a way Ben just wasn't. This strange green-clad visitor was definitely female. Her eyes were slightly wider, her face a touch softer. She blinked at him, confusion written all over her face. Ethan? She shook her head and blinked again, her eyes hardened. You're not... Who are you? She reached for her wrist and Rex raised both hands. My name is Rex Salazar. I'm sort of a big deal superhero here. Look, if the last few days is anything to go by, then you're probably from an alternative universe. So maybe let's talk before we fight. The girl blinked at him. Okay. Alternate universe? That's not that weird. She sat up in the crater as Rex turned to Cesar. Can we send her back? Not for a while. Ben did a number on the void gun. The girl frowned. Who's Ben? And your null void gun looks like a piece of shit, by the way. What backwater plumber base did you dig that up from? Cesar frowned. I built it. She raised an eyebrow at him. Rex held up his hand. Okay, Gringa, relax. What's your name? She raised an eyebrow at him. Jennifer Tennyson, but I go by Gen 10, though. Rex held up a hand and pulled her to her feet. Nice to meet you. Cesar, you can get that gun fixed, right? Rex's brother nodded. It may take several days, though. What concerns me is what brought her here. If the Alpha is what drew Ben here, then why did she end up here? Jen dusted off her jeans and shrugged. Any chance we could talk this over with some food? I'm starving. Had to skip breakfast to do an interview that I got zapped out of. Rex looked over at White Knight. His faceplate was cracked. He thought fast. I'll take White Knight and Jen back to base. You can go fix your gun in peace. Just let us know when it's done. Cesar nodded. Jen shrugged. Honestly, it's better than what I was doing with my day. She followed him into the ship. She kept staring at Rex. He frowned. You okay? Jen seemed to realize that she'd been staring inside. Sorry, you look a lot like someone I knew. It's not exact. His hair was a little longer, and you're taller than him, but definitely similar. Her hand had wandered to a necklace around her neck. She was twisting the ring on it between her fingers. It was a silver band set with a single emerald surrounded by a ring of diamonds. Rex got the impression that this person he reminded her of had been important to her. They reached the base in silence. Holiday was waiting for them. She wasn't smiling. Rex frowned. 6? Is he okay? Holiday sighed as White Knight walked off to his secure room to fix his faceplate, which luckily hadn't cracked all the way through. He's stabilized, but he hasn't woken up yet. Jen frowned, and Holiday glanced at her, both eyebrows shooting up. I take it sending the alien hero home didn't go too well. Rex shrugged. We think we got Ben home okay, but, well, Jen popped up when he vanished. Jen spoke up for the first time since the ship had landed. I figure I'm an alternate version of this Ben. Paradox is way better at explaining this than I am, but I could if you have a piece of paper. Holiday shrugged, seeming resigned to this strangeness, and held out her clipboard. Thanks. Jen flipped to a blank page and drew a single line. Okay, so the way he explained it was that the easiest way to think about the multiverse is like an orchard, with a bunch of different trees. Each tree is a timeline. She drew another tree parallel to the other. Most of the time, the trees are kept from touching each other. Don't ask me why he didn't have an easy way to explain it. Something about polluting timelines. But on occasion, she drew a branch on each of the trees. They intersect. He said it's usually too small for anyone to notice, but sometimes the growths can reach into the other tree, which can cause the two trees to destroy each other. So whatever brought me here, we need to find it and put a stop to it and get me home. Rex nodded and then shook his head. Wait, can you go over that again? I'm beyond confused. Holiday nodded. I think I understand. I'll look over the scans. I'll have Bobo help me. Go get some rest, Rex. You need it after today. Jen can use one of the spare beds. Rex nodded and motioned for Jen to follow him, but he didn't head directly to the bunks. Instead, he popped in to check on 6. Holiday had told the truth. There was no change. Jen frowned. What happened? Rex sighed, sat on one of the counters, and began to explain the events of the previous day, from his fight with Ben all the way to saying goodbye to the male Ultimatrix user. Jen nodded. Can you get this thing open? She tapped the tube 6 was currently contained in. Rex nodded. Yeah, I'm good with machines. Why, though? Jen spun the dial on the Ultimatrix. Because I think I can help your friend. Rex leapt to his feet, hope in his eyes as she changed form. She was marble-skinned with winking green stars in her skin. When the lights dimmed, Rex opened the tube and Jen laid her hands on Six's head. She closed her eyes and glowed bright. In a moment, the monitors picked up and Six blinked. Rex leaned over as Jen stepped back, transforming back to herself. Six sat up as Holiday came running into the room. Rex grinned at her. She fixed Six! He gestured to Jen, who waved slightly. Holiday frowned. Artemis. That's what I call that transformation. She's got innate healing abilities. I've used them before. You guys are set on getting me home, and I wanted to do something for you, too. Rex grinned at her as Holiday checked Six's vitals. I like her. Jen smiled slightly.